All right, cool. We are live. So all right, we should be good. Yeah, cool. So let's see. I guess so we've got, like I said, we've got the two wheated bourbon. Both of those look like they're 5 years old. And then the straight wheat whiskey, those are both 6 years old. Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
These will be good.
The only thing I don't have, if you have it, is the proofs on each sample, each barrel.
I do have that. Yep. So I can give that out as we go. It looks like barrel 858 is 113.2.
Okay.
580 is 115.8.
All right.
And then 302 is 111.7, so 111.7.
All right.
And then 301 is 112 even.
Okay, good.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah, I mean, let's jump straight into it. I'm assuming anybody watching this doesn't need an introduction to Old Elk or to yourself, but if you want to kind of give a little bit of your background and kind of how you ended up in Colorado. I know it's been a big jump, and I guess it's been 5 years now since you left Indiana and came on with Old Elk.
Yeah, I left. It'd be 5 years into this month, actually. So yeah, I left at the end of May in 2016. So in June I'll be starting my 43rd year in the business. Wow. I spent 38 years at the Lawrenceburg, Indiana distillery. Mm-hmm. I operated under the umbrella of 4 different ownerships, but the first 24 years from 1978 to 2002 is really when I got the best training in the world from the Seagram company relative to becoming a master distiller. In 2002, Seagram's decided to get out of the beverage alcohol business completely. They had taken interest in music and movies, and sold the beverage alcohol business to support those ventures. So in 2002, Pernod Ricard and Diageo jointly bought all of the Seagram brands. Mm-hmm. And then from 2002 to about 2008, we were operated under the ownership of Pernod Ricard. But really in 2002 is when the facility started becoming a contract distiller. And today they are, I would say that they're the largest contract alcohol or distilled spirit contractor in the world. So in 2002, we continued to produce all the brands for Diageo on a contract basis, and we continued obviously to produce all the brands that Pernod acquired. In 2008, Pernod acquired another brand in the business and wound up with 2 distilleries and 2 bottling houses, and really only had capacity for 1 of each. So the Lawrenceburg facility was ultimately sold, and that's when we became LDI, Lawrenceburg Distillers, Indiana, for a period of about 4.5 years. And during that time frame, we were 100% contract distillers. We had lost all our brand affiliations. Yeah. And during that 4.5 years was when we really actively started pursuing third-party contract sales to fill out the capacity of the plant. I mean, we had still continued to produce for Diageo and Pernod, obviously on a contract basis, but we probably grew our third-party contract sales from probably a dozen to a couple hundred over that 4.5-year period.
Jeez. So in those early days when it was truly just Seagram's, there was no contract going on. That was just for the Seagram brands, Seagram 7, everything else that they owned. I guess, did they own Four Roses at that time? And
yeah,
few others.
Yeah, they had, when I started in 78, I believe they had five distilleries. They had, Lawrenceburg, Indiana. They had Four Roses in Kentucky. They had a distillery in Maryland. The name eludes me. And they actually had two other small ones in Kentucky. One was Cynthiana, and I don't remember the third one. But in any case, yeah, the Seagram family had a broad range. They also had a large facility in Canada as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the Lawrenceburg plant was really built to produce all the components that went into Seven Crown, and literally that's where the 5 really popular mash bills came from. That we made famous as a contract distiller. So those were all blending components that went into Seven Crown and then some of the other bourbons that Seagram owns. Actually, we were allowed to provide about 9.9% of the components that went into Crown Royal. So
it was not 100% Canadian whiskey. I guess it is Canadian whiskey. It's just that by law it can be anything under 10%. As long as it's yeah. Oh, that's pretty cool. And now I have heard. It's funny that you said the Seagrams wanted to get into the music industry. Somebody told me a story about that, and I didn't realize, it was massive at that point, and then they made a push to get into the entertainment industry and kind of sold everything off at the height, wasn't it? And which, I guess maybe moving into the 70s, I don't know if it would have been as popular, but I don't know. That's still some pretty big brands. So
sadly, it was a venture that failed miserably.
And that's what I heard. I didn't want to say it, but
no, it was a result of third generation stepping into the family businesses, and Edgar Jr. really is the gentleman that took the interest in the movies and music, and the rest is history. But
I was going to say, is that, what do they call that? The Scion effect or something?
It's somewhat of a common problem, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, but, exactly. So, well, cool. Well, let's talk about Old Elk a little bit. So you would have come there. You said we're coming up on 5 years, and I know the wheat whiskeys are 6 years old and assumably made in Indiana. So you kind of had your hand in these whiskeys the entire time, right?
Oh yeah. I actually met Old Elk. It'd be going on 8 years ago, and I was still master distiller in Lawrenceburg. And Old Elk came to me, and they were interested in getting into the bourbon business. And they came to me and asked me to craft custom mash bills for them. They wanted to be unique on the shelf, and subsequently wanted mash bills that weren't available anywhere else or by anyone else, rather than buy the 5 staple mash bills that we were producing for other folks, but all world-class whiskey. So that's really how it started, and really the first mash bill that they tasked me with back then was the Old Elk flagship bourbon. And they gave me 2 words to work with that one. They said, we want it to be a custom mash bill, and we want the product to be smooth and easy. And really that was it. So
I was gonna say, is that like a nice thing to only have that guidance, or it creates all kinds of? It's like, well, how smooth, like how easy are we talking? Like, you want me to just proof it down with like GNS or?
No, the truth of the matter is that was my first. The first time that I was able to have the ability to craft a custom mash bill from the ground up.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And the other thing was that I wasn't really restricted by cost so much. So, for me, it was really exciting. At that point, I was, 36 years into my career. And, we were making world-class whiskeys for a lot of folks, but we had never produced any custom mash bills for anybody.
Yeah.
So literally from there, I just leveraged my experience. I knew to get smooth and easy characteristics that I had to get the malted barley content way up in the mash bill. In the back of my mind, all the mash bills that I produced prior always had some degree of rye in them for a really nice spice characteristic. And to get that characteristic to carry over to the distillate, it takes a minimum of 15% rye in the mash bill. So really, from that point on, it was reverse math. I took the corn content down to the minimum for a bourbon mash bill, which is 51%. Factored in the 15% rye to get that spice, and that left me room for the 34% malted barley that's in that particular mash bill.
So that's it. So it's like a high malt bourbon, and that's, you hear people talk a lot about, high rye bourbon, but nobody really talks about a high malt bourbon. So that really one of the first of its kind. We've seen a few others pop up. Chattanooga whiskey comes to mind, but that's really interesting. Is it?
You're cutting out.
Sorry, I'm getting a call. Hey, can you hear me?
Sorry. Yeah.
So it's just, that malted barley creates a much rounder, easier flavor in the whiskey than, I always just compare to bread. And is that a decent comparison? Rye toast as opposed to like I don't know if they make barley toast, but just a piece of white bread or something is kind of the general.
I would say somewhat, but I think probably maybe a better analogy would be like a malted milkshake, which is crafted or created from malted barley. So it's got a sweet type component to it. The corn content in a bourbon mash bill is what really brings the really robust characteristics that you would attribute to a bourbon, the sort of bold in your face flavors. And mainly that's kind of the fusel oil groups in the congener range. But so by lowering the corn from what a normal bourbon mash bill would probably be 75% corn back to 51. I reduced the impact, I guess, of the corn attributes. And then that allowed me the space to put in 34% malted barley, which allowed me to leverage the smooth and easy characteristics that would be attributed to that particular grain.
So you're kind of just, you're plugging and playing a little bit. It's like, okay, I know I need to be, or I have to be at least 51% corn.
Right.
You wanted to be 15% rye with the flavor. So then it's like, all right, now I know how much I can amp up that malted barley. That's
exactly. Yeah.
Well, let's dive into some of these samples. What would you suggest? Do we go to the wheat whiskey first, or they seem to be a little bit lower in proof, but they're all relatively close. They're all between 111 and 113.
Generally speaking, at least through my training, you usually start with the lightest congener profile and then work your way up to the heaviest. Okay. So in this case, I would suggest that we do the wheat whiskeys first.
Okay.
That'd be 301, 302, and go from there. Again, these the two mash bills we're looking at today are also custom mash bills for Old Elk. Again, 6 or 7 years ago, after we produced the bourbon mash bill, we got back together with Old Elk, and they were wondering, what do you think might be popular 6 or 7 years down the road, which is really where we're at today.
Yeah.
And, back then rye whiskey was gaining traction like crazy, and due in part really because of that 95% rye mash bill that we were producing in Lawrenceburg with such success. So, at that time I talked and I said, there's some really nice wheat whiskeys and wheat bourbons out there, but that market is largely untapped right now. So as we talked, we talked, and I thought that, if we did like an extreme wheated bourbon relative to a wheat content, and then the wheat whiskey, I basically mimicked the 95% rye mash bill and just swapped it out for wheat. But
that's what the wheat whiskey is, right? It's 95 wheat,
95 and 5% malt. And interestingly enough, that 95% rye mash bill is extremely difficult to produce. It's rye has some really ornery characteristics relative to fermenting it. has a real propensity to foam, and it's a very thick mash. And the wheat whiskey has very similar difficult characteristics. So I was able to leverage everything that we had learned over the years about how to really produce that rye whiskey and have the quality come out the way it should. Everything we learned about that particular mash bill actually translated to the 95% wheat mash bill. And then, from the bourbon mash bill standpoint, that mash bill is 45% wheat, 4% malt, and 51% corn. So again, we took the corn to the minimum and then maximized what was left with wheat. I would say all their wheat bourbons or wheat whiskeys on the market are going to be probably closer to 51% wheat.
It's kind of like that barely legal wheat whiskey, kind of, I guess, how we used to see Kentucky rye. It did not put the rye grain forward. It just, they get enough to make it rye whiskey, and that would be it. But
so that was the thought process. We wanted, again, Old Elk wanted to be different than everybody else on the shelf. So in doing that, we went to the extreme relative to the wheat and the wheat content in both of those categories, wheat bourbon and wheat whiskey. So
which even just on the nose, it's so nice and soft, and you get some of that, a little bit of just brown sugar and vanilla, but really creamy on the mouthfeel.
It's compared to a high corn content corn bourbon mash bill, this is a much milder product. I mean, everybody's palate's different, so everybody's going to see things differently. But I get some nice honey notes in there, a little bit of fruit. But again, it's a very pleasant product, and it's a category of its own. That's what's really interesting is, the Old Elk brands. We've got a player in 4 different categories relative to the whiskey. So we've got the high malt bourbon mash bill. Bourbon's a category by itself. We've got the 95% rye, 5% malt mash bill. That's not custom, but it's a very unique mash bill and hard to make. That's rye whiskey is a category of its own. And then we've got the same with the wheat bourbon and the wheat whiskey. So we offer up 4 different categories and mash bills that are entirely different in those categories relative to other ones that are on the shelf.
And it's pretty unique for a new, I don't want to call you a newer distillery, but in the distilling world, 5-6 years is relatively new. But, I think y'all are now distributed in basically every state at this point. And, but still to try to hit all different categories is interesting. And I first found you through the wheat whiskey. I know some of these barrel picks started popping up, and I'm like, I'll give them a shot. I don't know about wheat whiskey. I don't know if I love that category. And then I had it for the first time, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is, it's way different than I've maybe had 2-3 other wheat whiskeys before that. And I think it brings in enough of the characteristics of what you're used to in a bourbon, but just brings a lot of rounded, softer notes. The higher proof definitely helps, at least for me. I think, just gives a little bit of kick and some body to it. But really, both of these barrels, I'm diving into 302 now.
All right.
I can't sit on samples for too long. I get anxious, and then I'm like, oh, that was good. Now let me try this. But
the really cool thing about barrel programs is that each barrel is again like a fingerprint. They're all subtly different, and a lot of that comes from the barrel notes. The type of wood that's cut, when it's cut, the age of the wood when it's cut, how it's air dried, how it's charred, and then and then even to the amount of circulation, air circulation, and whatnot that's around that barrel when it's matured. So you can have the same batch number of product going into different barrels, and you could age them back to back, and they'll still come out subtly different. So it's
Which I think
pretty cool.
These two barrels are a perfect example because they're 301 and 302. So I assume that's the same distillation run, probably sitting somewhere relatively close in a warehouse, but pretty strikingly different. To me, 302 has a little more tannins on the taste. I almost get like a dry cocoa note, whereas the 301, I got a lot more of that fruit, dried cherries and that kind of thing. But now, do you think that is more just, I you said, air circulation in the warehouse, or just the oak that was used, or just some mystery thing that we'll never figure out? And
no, I don't. There's so many variables. I don't know that you can pinpoint any one of them. It's a combination of all those variables. But I can tell you that the white distillate that went into all the barrels is always each lot number that went into barrels was evaluated with our sensory and quality panel. So from a quality aspect, everything that went into the barrels was a very high quality product.
Yeah.
And again, once they go into the barrels, then it's up to the barrel to do the finishing. One thing I tell one thing I tell people all the time is that a barrel will make good whiskey better, but it won't make bad whiskey good. So you have to have a quality whiskey going into the barrel in order to get a quality whiskey out. Yeah,
which that is interesting. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's the old garbage in, garbage out. Like you can't hide a bad distillation or bad fermentation with oak flavor. Like it's only going to highlight and accentuate, but if it's bad, it's just going to be bad. Well, that's what it's always funny to hear people say, like, it's just not good. We need to leave it in the barrel. Like, it's just going to taste worse in 5 years with more oak. And
then interestingly enough, that's really a result of the way all whiskeys are distilled. The distillation part for whiskeys is really pretty simple and straightforward. You're not doing any fractional distilling on it, so you're not separating components like you do when you make neutral grain spirits. Really, all you're doing is transferring whatever flavor aspects you develop in the fermenter to the bottle. And that's why bourbons and whiskeys are all distilled at 100 to 135 proof for the most part, because in that proof range, all of the flavor components transfer. They don't start separating out in the column like they would as you raise the proof, going up the column. So the fermentation part for any whiskey is a critical part, and the distillation is pretty simple.
That was going to be my question. So you would say the fermentation, and I guess even the fermentation is a ton of factors, temperatures, yeast strains, time, all of that.
Absolutely.
Which I always have this theory that, with a lot of the new distilleries that are popping up, I think a lot of times I see the distillery that went and got a brewer or somebody with a brewing background and brought them in and brought on somebody to help with the distillation are oftentimes a lot better off, because fermentation is it is a tricky thing and can go south quick. Whereas distillation, like you said, it's a little more cut and dry. I know or at least on, column stills, pots can, I assume, have some variation, but that's interesting. So, I mean, with these, when you're looking at the fermentation process, do you have a particular yeast that you like for the wheat as opposed to the bourbon, or or it just all depends?
Well, it depends, but we have proprietary yeast that we use for the Old Elk mash bills. And we had proprietary yeast that we were using for, all the other folks that we were producing for. So that, the yeast definitely, the type of yeast or the strain of yeast definitely has a big impact on the type of flavor profiles that are created and the degree of those components that are created during the fermentation process. The real critical factors is the critical factors really is you have to have a really good, clean source of water, because any odor associated with the water you're using will carry over. The quality of your grain has to be the same way. It has to have no extraneous off odors that might be attributed to poor storage or poor drying. Some of the ones that come to mind are must or mold, or barnyard or burnt. Those are all grain defects that carry right through the fermentation into the bottle. The temperature of your fermentation is super critical. If the fermenter gets hot, if it gets over 90 degrees for whatever reason, that induces stress into the yeast, and that causes them to start producing different components or higher levels of different components, which, when you get to a certain threshold, then they go from being good quality aspects to negative. And then the age of your fermentation has another big impact. My experience, I found that the best distillates we made were when we distilled them right as they were finishing up. I know there's a lot of folks in the industry that'll target maybe an 80-hour fermentation, but I can tell you through experience that the amount of enzymes coming in on the grains on a daily or weekly basis changes. So the rate of your fermentation is going to change just based on the enzyme contents coming in on your grain. So in a lot of cases, your fermentation may be done at 60 hours. And if you're going to wait 20 more to distill it, that's going to have a negative impact on your product.
I didn't even think about that. So what are you measuring or watching during the fermentation to know that it's done at 60 hours as opposed to 80? I guess is that taste, flavor, alcohol levels in the fermentation, or?
It's really all of that. We did a series of wet chemistry tests on the mash over the course of the fermentation. So we would run those tests on a set sample, and we'd run that same series of tests on a 24-hour sample. Same series on a 48-hour sample, and then a same series on the drop sample. So through checking the amount of sugar that was being consumed, we could monitor at what rate the fermentation was taking place. We would measure pH, and we would do a titration on it to measure the acid rise in the fermenters. And then more than anything, every day I went out, and we had all open top fermenters for our whiskey program, but I would just walk and look at every fermenter and just visually look at the activity,
see what's going on.
And so as the CO2 gas production started to tail off, and in some cases quit altogether, that was the signal to get those fermenters in the still. That's provided that your sugar was consumed and you didn't have some kind of other problem going on that killed the yeast. But so it was again, it leveraged a lot of experience and everything that I learned relative to becoming a very successful master distiller was really what I learned from the Seagram family, and that was for me, that was a 24-year training program. And if they'd stayed in the business, it would have been longer.
You didn't want to make the switch over to a music or a movie industry career. You just said, I'll stick with the alcohol.
Sadly, I have no musical talent. I wish I did.
Yeah. No, I mean, and this is why I love Barrel Picks, is because it's kind of my Trojan horse to ask people all the nerdy and crazy whiskey questions that I have. And
sure, absolutely.
It's like, hey, well, we're picking some barrels, but I also have these questions. But no, I love just hearing those kind of details. And I know you said kind of in the intro just how the Seagrams took it so serious with the research and everything. And so were they constantly improving on the process and researching? Because we're talking the 70s. That's when whiskey was kind of starting to not slow down completely, but it was moving more into that vodka phase, and everyone's drinking, I don't know, whatever the vodka cocktail is of the day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, the truth is that Seagram's, of course, they were number one in the business for
mm-hmm,
many, many years, but
mm-hmm.
they were extreme. They had a very, very progressive research and development program, really from the 40s all the way to 2002 when they got out of business. So they actually had a department of maybe 8 or 10 PhD scientists that really studied every aspect of the business. And as they did that, I mean, they collected enormous amounts of data on, again, all aspects, whether it's water, grain, cooking, mashing, fermentation, distillation, maturation. And so over the years, bear with me. So over the years, they condensed all the information into 2 books. I still refer to them as the Blue Bibles.
Oh, wow. Oh, so that's original from.
This is Seagram's. These are Seagram books, and this is all the information that they learned that made some of the best whiskeys in the world. So all the procedures and distillation methods and everything that's in these books is really what Seagram's taught me relative to becoming a master distiller. So these are all the methods that they learned to make great whiskey, and then that's what they translated to their master distillers as they went through their training program. So there's cool. A complete wealth of knowledge, and it's really technical. It's super technical data. It's not just, I mean, this is,
if I pick it up, it's probably not going to make any sense, but with your degrees and everything in history, it's like, oh, okay. I'm guessing there's not many of those floating around anywhere.
Well, they were never published. Again, they were, and I actually tried to get them reprinted for company use, and wasn't able to find a bookmaker to do that. But I would say anybody that worked in production under the Seagram umbrella probably has a copy somewhere. But
they've got one hiding.
Again, there's a wealth of knowledge, and they're great reference books. So
that's really cool. Huh. Okay, back to the whiskey. I know everyone watching is like hoping I stop asking questions and talk about the whiskey, but that's just too much good information. So I'm leaning more towards 301 than 302. I'm not going to see what you thought was the best, but if you had a preference, what were your thoughts between the two? Did you kind of get a little more of the same differences that I noted, or I want to hear your experienced palate kind of picks up on those two wheat whiskeys?
Well, I think for me, I would agree with you on the 301. Pardon me. I just think it has more balance to it than the 302. I think 302 just had a little bit of a harsh note to it, if you will, sharper. I'm not saying that's bad, but I think, if I was to close my eyes and pick one, I'm pretty sure it'd be 301, because I just think it's got a little more balance, maybe a little more integrity to it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I feel better about my choice. And I don't know if you're just saying that, but
no.
Take it and run. Yeah. I know you give me the honest opinion. All right. Well, let's move on to the bourbons. So like you said, so this is a high wheat bourbon. So it's 45% wheat in the mash bill for this bourbon?
51 corn, 45 wheat, and 4% malt.
Okay.
So again, this I think this is an entirely different category compared to the wheat whiskey, but it is in the bourbon world, but it's definitely different than most bourbons out there from the mash bill standpoint.
It just is interesting how different those noses are between the two. And I get it, 51% corn is going to create a big difference between the two, but just really different. I actually pick up a little more oak on this one. I'm tasting 858 right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what's interesting, at least for me, with the wheated bourbon and the wheated whiskey, is because the corn content is either zero or at the min 51%, and because corn has those really robust characteristics, having the lower content or no content of corn actually unmasks some of the flavors that wheat brings to the table that you might not see on a higher corn content mash bill with wheat in it. So you may actually see things that you haven't seen before, and it's really attributed to the low corn content or no corn content.
Okay, I think I've got 858 cornered. I'm gonna move on to 580 with 858. I do pick up, and I don't know if it's just you're more sensitive to it coming out of the wheat whiskey, but I do pick up a little more of like a cornbready note. I get a little oak and a little bit of the grain note, but really nice, really balanced. A lot of different stuff going on.
Yeah.
All right.
I get a little toffee with the wheat bourbons.
All right, so 580. Man, that's good. I feel like I get a little more of that toffee in 580. It's almost like a caramelized orange peel to me, like candied orange peel. Good brightness, but a really nice. It's not overly sweet, but it's just got a good richness to it.
I think I get a little bit of a drier mouthfeel with the wheated bourbons.
Yeah. Now, is that just because typically the sugar content in corn would lend itself to kind of a sweeter palate, or?
Yeah, that certainly would have something to do with it. Yeah.
Man, so on the wheat whiskey, I felt like I had a good idea of which way I was going. This one, I'm a little more torn between.
Well, that's the one thing about what I can tell you about Old Elk products, at least the ones that I produced. From a quality perspective, all of them are world-class whiskeys. I can't guarantee you'll necessarily like our mash bills, but if you're looking from a quality perspective, it's going to be as good or better than anything else out there.
Well, I think that's the great thing about kind of how y'all did it is, you waited. I think the youngest product was 4 years or maybe 5 years before it was released. You gave it a good amount of age. You kind of got it right first with the mash bill, and then started laying it down. And I think, that's why people are buying into what you're doing, just because they know it's quality. And I think a lot of times what we run into on Seelbach is people, if they are buying a new brand or new product that's a little higher priced, it's like, hey, I just don't know. And with the age statement and kind of knowing that you distill it, that's usually not people's contemplations when it comes to Old Elk. So, man, both of these are.
Yeah.
I may have to pour a little more 858 now.
No, we're at Old Elk, we're very fortunate. Our ownership, Kurt Nancy Richardson, actually, he's the founder of OtterBox phone covers. But he allowed us the latitude and the ability to bring expensive custom mash bills to market to the consumer.
Yeah, I wish I used his other products as much as I drink his whiskey, because I'm looking at an iPhone that's cracked right now. But I've got 5 bottles of Old Elk open, but I didn't have that Otter box.
He might have to come out with an Otter Glencairn.
Yeah. Now that's an idea. That would be the best crossover I've ever seen, and covering for your Glencairn.
But they, yeah, and you know, with their backing, they gave us the latitude of waiting till the products were 4 years old or older to bring them to market.
Mm-hmm.
Where, you know, that's a hurdle that almost every other craft distillery has trouble with. I mean, at some point, you know, it's really hard to wait 4 years to come to market.
Yeah.
And you know, we had the ability to do that, which really greatly increases the quality of your product.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, I've gone back. I think I'm leaning towards 580. What'd you think between the two wheated bourbons?
I think right now for me it's a coin flip.
I know that's for me. I think 858. I get a little more of the grain shining through on the back end, which I thought 580 was kind of similar to the first one, a little more fruit. I don't know. It's really close, but I'm leaning that way. And you know, usually in coin flips, I end up like, okay, well, which one? Where was this distilled, or was it distilled on an important date, or was it look for some other sign? But
yeah,
no, that 580 is pretty good. So I think I'm probably gonna go
with that one.
Yeah, which that's been the fun part about tasting these is like you can't go wrong. It's really just up to personal preference
exactly
of what you like better. Well, cool. Well, I'll follow up with Alex to get these numbers in his hands to get those pulled. But thanks for coming on. I've greatly enjoyed chatting and getting a lot of in-depth information. And yeah, so for all those watching, I don't have an ETA on when this will be available on Seelbach. We'll post about it and make sure everybody has enough of a runway to know when they're going to be released. But Greg, really appreciate you coming on, and yeah, I really enjoyed this, and thanks for letting us do these 2 barrel picks.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it, and it's always fun to hang out with folks and talk shop, especially when they're passionate and knowledgeable. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. All right, well, have a good rest of your day. Thanks.
All right, take care.
Bye.